Hey YouTubers, hope you're all having a wonderful start to the month of March. In this video, I'm going to discuss the reasons why I think the Leica SL is still a great option if you're looking to get into the Leica world or if you're transitioning from a DSLR to a mirrorless camera. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Now, before we jump into the Leica SL, I feel as if it's my duty to give you a little backstory on what my previous camera setup was. When I first got into photography industry, I sought out the advice and knowledge of others in the industry that had had success building their photography brand. One photographer in particular was Joey Wright. Joey is a South Florida-based swimwear and lifestyle photographer. You can check out his work through the links in the caption below. Over the years, Joey and I have become friends, and he has really helped me in playing the role of a mentor. It's from his mentoring and knowledge that I ended up shooting Nikon. When I first met him, he was shooting with a Nikon D3S and had all the Nikon glass a photographer could ask for. So naturally, I followed suit and invested in the Nikon ecosystem. My first Nikon camera was a D3100 with a kit lens that was, I believe, was an 18 to 55 millimeter. At the time, this was all I needed, as I would mainly use the camera to take photos of friends, hanging out, nature, landscapes, all the normal subjects that people photograph when they are first getting into photography. As my skills progressed, I decided to invest in a better performing camera. That's why I jumped into the Nikon D7100. This camera would be my tool of choice over the next few years, and I would take the money I would make from shooting events and invest it into lenses. My first non-kit lens was a Nikon 24-70 2.8, probably the most versatile lens I have ever had. Then came the 51.4 and then eventually the 85-1.8, and that was my kit. It was not until I started shooting portraits of models that I decided to go full frame. And as you can probably guess, I went full in on a used Nikon D3S, following Joey's footsteps, of course. Once I started using the D3S, my photography skills really started to grow. I started to understand the best camera to use was not just about the actual specs or the abilities of what your camera can do, but another key aspect was how the camera felt in my hands. The way the buttons were designed, the access to the menu, and the build quality were among the details I started to pay more attention to. After shooting with the D3S for a couple of years, my eyes started to wander. I wanted to see what other systems were out there and if there was a better solution for me. At this time, Sony started coming out with their A-series line, and from what I could tell from forums and friends in the photography world, people were going crazy over these Sony bodies. So I figured I would give them a try. At this point in time, I think Sony had just released the A7 II, and people were falling in love with the video capabilities that the camera offered. With its low light performance and in-body stabilization, it seemed like a no-brainer. But I was not ready to jump ship and renounce Nikon completely. I was lucky enough to find a used Sony A7 with a pancake 18mm lens for cheap through Adorama.com. At first, I liked how small the body was, and paired with the pancake lens, it had a very small footprint. I decided to buy an adapter in order to use my Nikon glass with the Sony. I ended up using that setup for most of my video work. After some time though, I came to realize that the Sony camera wasn't for me. Between the menu being overly complicated, the amount of shortcut buttons on the camera, and just the sheer size of the camera, it just felt dainty in my hands. I guess I have big hands. Maybe. I'm not sure. The jury's still out on that. By the end of the day, I just did not enjoy my experience using it. Fast forward a couple of years, and I find myself working for Leica Store Miami. This was a pivotal moment in my photographic career. Before starting to work at Leica Store, the only thing I knew about Leicas was the fact that they were the first to develop 35mm film back during the World Wars, and that they were very expensive. Never did I imagine myself as a Leica shooter. After the first couple of months on the job, I fell head over heels for the brand. So much so that I was offered a chance to visit the factory in Wetzlar, Germany for 10 days of training, and I immediately jumped on board. I know 10 days doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're training from 9 to 6 every day and then spending your nights conversing with Leica enthusiasts, you end up building a brand loyalty like no other. After the trip, I decided that I had to get into the Leica ecosystem. I sold my Nikon D3S and lenses to a friend of mine and never looked back. Because I knew what awaited me would change my photography forever, and it did. And that brings us to the reason why we are here today. To talk about the Leica SL, Leica's first mirrorless full-frame camera. The Leica SL was originally released back in October of 2015 with a full-frame 24 megapixel CMOS sensor capable of recording 4K footage at 24 frames per second and 1080 at 120 frames per second with 8-bit and 10-bit recording. At the time of its release, it had the highest resolution EVF on the market at 4.4 million megapixels, which was one of the major specs that drew me to this camera. Now, before I get into the reason why the SL changed my photography perspective, let me just say that I know that Leica has released the SL2 this past fall, and frankly, it blows the original out of the water. And hey, if I had an extra $6,000 lying around, I would definitely look to purchase it, but that isn't the case, unfortunately. Now back to the SL. As you can see, the camera is the definition of a minimalistic design. Starting with the front of the camera, you'll see only 2 buttons. One for attaching and detaching the lenses, and the other button can be customized to do a variety of different things. As we move towards the top of the camera, the first thing that sticks out to me is a large info screen. The screen itself is large enough to see all your settings and bright enough to be able to see at night. To the right of the screen, you'll notice 3 silver buttons and a black wheel. The top silver button is used for your actual shutter, so by clicking that button is how the camera actually takes a photo. The other 2 can be customizable. For my own use, the button with the classic red record button is used for exactly that, recording videos. The other button, I have it set to switch between photos and video. The large black wheel can either be used for changing your shutter speed or your aperture value. This coincides with the scrolling wheel on the back of the camera, which we'll get to shortly. On the opposite side, you'll see a little rectangle. This is not a button of any sort, it is actually the GPS. Moving to the back of the camera, you'll notice a total of 8 buttons. 8. That's it. I mean, it's just so clean and simple. It's awesome. Let's start from the left side. First and foremost, you have the on and off switch. Then moving to the right, you'll notice a black button. This is also customizable, but for normal uses, it switches between views of just the LCD, just the EVF, or you can have it automatically switch between the 2 depending whether your eye is up to the EVF sensor or not. The next button, or joystick as I like to call it, is a navigator, meaning you can use this nubbin to scroll through the menu or scroll through your images. The wheel to the right of the joystick has several different functions. If you were to click it in, you look at the top LCD screen, you can see how you can switch between photo modes, such as manual, program, shutter priority, and aperture priority. It also can be used as a scrolling wheel in your menu or in playback mode when you're looking at your photos. And you can set it to either change your shutter or aperture settings, which correlates to the wheel on top. And finally, you have 4 customizable menu buttons along the exterior of the LCD on the back. Each of these buttons can serve as shortcuts to get to certain menus such as camera settings, image settings, setup, and favorites menu. On top of that, you can customize them to perform different functions when you long press them. For example, if I long press the top left button, it instantly takes me to my ISO settings. The bottom left takes me to my white balance, top right to my focus mode, and bottom right I have set to my drive mode. Those 4 settings are the ones I switch up the most, so it's nice to have them right at your fingertips so you don't have to dive into the full menu. As you can see, the SL is not cluttered in any way with an overabundance of buttons or quick menus. They designed it so that as a photographer, you can streamline your workflow with a few simple customizable options. Another great feature of this camera is a simple fact that it comes equipped with a 2-slot SD card reader. Most cameras these days have them, but at the time of its release, the SL was one of the few cameras with this feature. Don't get me started on the Canon EOS R. Looking at you, Canon. Now remember how I spoke about the way the camera feels in your hand and how important that was? Well, if that was the only metric in deciding to buy this camera, I would still get it in a heartbeat. The way the SL is molded out of a solid piece of milled aluminum with the protruding hand grip is extremely comfortable to carry around. Side note, most of my photographer friends would cringe at this, but 90% of the time, I don't even use a neck strap or a wrist strap with my camera. That's how comfortable I feel when holding it, as if it were an extension of my arm. Now, I have to say, I do not advocate anyone using any cameras without some sort of strap. They really can save your butt in a split second. Personally, when I do have to use straps, I like to use the Peak Design straps, but we'll get into that in another video. Another feature that I am fond of that I think gets thrown to the wayside is the fact that this camera and the L-mount lenses are weather sealed. I don't see many Leica users toughing it out in the Sahara Desert or trying to document a hurricane, but it is a nice feature to have when you need it. I can honestly say that I have been out shooting on the beach and a rogue wave came out of nowhere and hit the camera, and I thought it was a goner. I thought the camera was toast. I would have had to use it as large paperweight for the rest of my days. But to my surprise, I went home, I first dried off the camera, then I gently and carefully went over the whole camera with a damp paper towel with fresh water. Afterwards, I used canned air to dry it off and blow away any leftover salt or sand. Then went back over the whole camera with Zeiss alcohol wipes. I opened the card slot, took out the battery, took off the lenses, and just let it sit and air out for about 2 days. That was over a year ago, and the camera has never failed me. Knock on wood. Needless to say, this camera is rugged. Now, along with the camera body itself, when you purchase a new SL, which actually I don't think you can do anymore, so the used market is going to be your best bet. It should come with a few things. First off, check to make sure it comes with at least one battery. With the new tariffs on Germany, the price of the batteries went up by $25, bringing the new price point to $275 a battery. Did I mention Leica camera systems aren't cheap? Moving on. In the camera box, you should also receive an HDMI to USB-C cable, a charger with both US and European plug adapters, a black Leica strap, and if you are purchasing a used camera, make sure to check to see if it comes with a test certificate from Leica Camera. If you have never bought a used camera before and are a little skeptical about it, I suggest you either visit Leica Store Miami or go on their website to search for their used gear. I know for a fact that the head of their used department is a very detail-oriented individual, and he'll make sure you are receiving the best product possible. They actually do not take anything secondhand that they don't deem is in excellent working condition. One downside of going through them though is that they do not take trade-ins from other brands. Meaning if you are coming from Canon or Sony or Nikon or another brand, you would need to sell that equipment first before heading to the store. But good news, if you happen to have any other Leicas, they do take a few cameras in for trade. Nothing too old, I believe it's M6s or later, but still is a nice benefit of dealing with Leica Store Miami. Now, a disclaimer, I feel like I must mention that I no longer work for Leica Store Miami, so this is in no way an endorsement by them or an ad of any kind. They just happen to have great people working there, and they always take care of their customers. That being said, I hope I was able to give you guys a brief look into why I think the Leica SL is still a great option if you're looking to get into the Leica ecosystem or just looking to transition into a mirrorless camera. If you enjoyed this video, please take a second and hit the thumbs up icon, and if you really found it invigorating, I ask you to ponder about subscribing. I'll be releasing more Leica specific videos along with vlogs, model features, and other tips and tricks about the world of photography. So until next time, cheers.